Welcome to this e-learning course on Japanese communication style. Communicating with Japanese colleagues is rewarding, but sometimes it can be challenging. In this session, we'll learn how to bridge cultural gaps in communication when working with Japanese people. We'll look at indirect communication and the Japanese emphasis on group harmony and saving face, non-verbal communication and what it means for the listener to read between the lines to discern what is not being said, how to get the information you need for your Japanese colleagues and convey information efficiently to them, some basic communication tips to smooth the way in verbal and written exchanges. Japan is a highly indirect and non-verbal culture. This can sometimes leave room for ambiguity and even confusion. Because the Japanese people share a unique common history without much immigration and, as an island nation, share a space that is geographically isolated, they build on shared information and can thus communicate in subtle ways. Here's a real-life situation that illustrates the way miscommunication can happen with Japanese colleagues. Catherine has an idea for a new project, and she asks her Japanese manager what he thinks about its potential. He says, "It will be difficult for such a project to succeed." Hearing this, Catherine thinks that her manager has given her a challenge. She decides that she must work hard on the project and put much energy into it. What has gone wrong in this situation? Catherine interprets her manager's response as a challenge to work hard and make the project succeed. But is that what he intended? Ask a Japanese person what is happening in this scene, and he will say that, without a doubt, Catherine's manager is saying, "No, don't pursue that project." Why didn't he come right out and say that then? It's probably less that he's trying to hide his intentions from Catherine, and more a matter of not wanting to hurt her feelings or be too harsh. It's a famous cliché about Japanese people that they never say no, but they do. They just say it in subtle, often non-verbal ways that other Japanese people pick up on immediately, but that can be harder for the rest of us to perceive because we aren't used to them. What a Japanese person is saying may go far beyond the words themselves. Other ways Japanese people have of saying no include looking confused, sucking in the breath in a way indicating consternation or hesitation, saying or scratching an eyebrow with a look of confusion, among others. The problem here could have been avoided if Catherine had checked to find out if she had understood her manager's thoughts on the matter, instead of running with the project and assuming she knew what he intended. It would have been a good idea for her to tell him what she'd understood and what she'd planned to do. Then he could have swiftly corrected her interpretation of his words. For his part, he should have made an effort to be clearer, to state his thoughts explicitly in words, knowing that he was not talking to a fellow Japanese person who could have read his intentions telepathically. Here's another example of the kind of misunderstanding that can happen when you are working with Japanese colleagues. Luis Fernandez, a marketing manager, is sitting in yet another meeting with the division's management team made up of both Japanese and Spanish members. Yet again, the Japanese participants seem to be sitting back, not saying anything. He wonders, why don't they tell us what they're thinking? It's so frustrating not to know what's on their minds. Why can't they speak up with their opinions rather than leaving all the talking to us? Meanwhile, Kenichiro Hayashi is sitting in the same meeting. He has something that he wants to say, but no one has bothered to ask his opinion, and he can't find a good chance to speak up. Here once again we find Japanese colleagues not saying explicitly what they think, leaving their Spanish counterparts perplexed. Several factors could be at work in this situation. Kenichiro Hayashi is probably waiting for a moment of silence to speak. Silence is a crucial part of Japanese conversations, and in order to avoid potential conflict or interrupting each other, it is normal in Japanese people to wait for the group to fall silent before stepping in and giving one's opinion. For Kenichiro Hayashi, that moment never happens, so he remains quiet. Once again, the issue here is of a style of communication that seeks to preserve harmony and avoid conflict. Here's an example, however, of a very different type of problem that can occur. A Japanese supervisor at a Japanese factory in Poland noticed one of the employees on the line making a mistake. He shouted out to him, "Stupid! That's the wrong way to do it! That's going to cause defects!" Many of the other workers nearby were able to hear this outburst. The employee didn't say anything back and just looked down. 1 week later, the employee quit, giving no explanation. Here is an exception to the normally indirect Japanese communication style that has to do with hierarchical relationships. A superior may, in some cases, shout at or harshly criticize an employee who is lower in the hierarchy. In some cultures, being direct, honest, and straightforward is valued. People bring up points of disagreement and resolve them, usually without fear of harming their relationships with colleagues. As long as it is done, more or less diplomatically, this attitude is valued and respected. In Japan, though, bringing up differences has to be done delicately and carefully, or relationships can be permanently harmed. Harmony in relationships, called wa in Japanese, is valued above resolving differences. In general, people in Japan communicate in an indirect way, not coming right out and saying what they mean, but treading carefully so as not to offend or create conflict with others. They are reluctant to present negative information, and avoiding conflict is a priority for everyone, even if it means keeping one's opinion to oneself. The one exception to this rule in Japan is that within hierarchical relationships, harsh criticism is tolerated from a superior to a subordinate. It usually is not meant personally, but is intended for the entire group to learn from. Japanese employees know this and normally take it in this way, even though they may not like it. However, when Japanese people behave in this manner in other cultures, such outbursts are almost always viewed as unacceptable and, as we can see in our case study, do not tend to produce positive results. In general, however, for Japanese people, being vague is a necessary skill and art. Ambiguity and silence are built into the Japanese language. The subject of a sentence will often not be stated, or sentences will trail off, leaving the end of the sentence to the listener's imagination. Japanese people rely heavily on non-verbal means of communication, such as body language and tone of voice. In Japan, people are expected to intuitively perceive much that is unstated, and to communicate with the same level of subtlety themselves. There is a Japanese expression, if it smells bad, put a lid on it. It suggests that unpleasant realities should be hidden. This is the opposite of the assumption in some cultures that grievances and problems should be brought out into the open and discussed.